In a distant land, there was a king whose wife gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. They named her Talia. Upon her birth, the king ordered the seers and wise men of the kingdom to come tell her fortune. The seers and wise men all came to the same conclusion. The princess's life was in danger. One day, Talia would fall to her death from a piece of flaxseed. Upon hearing the prediction, the king ordered that all flax and hemp be removed from his kingdom in effort to avoid the terrible tragedy. As Talia grew into adulthood, she became the most beautiful in all the kingdom. She would often wander around her father's castle, and one day while exploring, she looked out a window and saw an old woman spinning. Talia had never seen a spindle and was very curious, so she went to the old woman and asked what she was doing. The old woman explained what the spindle was and showed Talia how to use it. Talia began to draw the thread, then suddenly a piece of stalk lodged under her fingernail. The princess immediately fell dead. Quickly, the old woman ran away, never to be seen again. The mourning king placed the princess in another palace in the country and boarded it up in effort to forget the disaster. Years later, another king from a neighboring kingdom was passing the palace while out hunting. His falcon had escaped him and flew into an open window of the palace. The king went in search of the bird. Searching the palace, he came upon the room Talia was lying in, like she was enchanted, not dead. He called out to her, but she did not respond. He tried repeatedly to wake her, but nothing was working. The king stood there admiring Talia's beauty. The more he watched her, the more enchanted he became, and he took advantage of the sleeping woman. The king finally left and returned to his own kingdom, and for a long time forgot all that had happened. Meanwhile, several months later, Talia gave birth while still asleep to twins, one boy and one girl. With the help of invisible fairies, the babies suckled their mother. One day, the little girl, while trying to suckle, accidentally placed Talia's finger into her mouth instead, and the flaxseed that was lodged under her nail came out, and Talia awoke, confused. When she saw the two babies, she immediately fell in love with them and decided that she would care for them. With the help of the unseen hands, Talia and the babies thrived in the palace alone. After some time, the king remembered Talia and decided to return and check on her. To his surprise, she was awake with two beautiful children. The king immediately fell in love with the children and Talia. The king told Talia who he was and explained what had happened and how the children came to be. The more they talked, the more in love they became. The king stayed for several days, but when he left, he promised Talia he would come for her and the children. The king went back to his own kingdom and kept repeating the names Talia, Sun, and Moon over and over, which upset the queen, his wife. This confused the queen at first, and she called her secretary immediately and sent him to investigate what was happening. The secretary followed the king on one of his trips to visit his Talia and the babies. Upon learning that the king had met, fell in love, and fathered two children from another woman, the queen was angry. She sent the secretary in the king's name to fetch the children, saying he wished to see them. Talia happily sent the children to the visit. Upon the arrival of the children, the queen immediately ordered the children to be killed and cooked in different dishes to feed the king. The cook, not wanting to upset the queen and face her wrath for not doing her bidding, took the children to the kitchen and prepared them many different dishes for the king's meal. At dinner that night, the queen presented the various dishes to the king and encouraged him to eat all, knowing she was feeding the children to him all the while, saying, "Eat away, you know not what you eat." The king thought nothing of what the queen was saying at first and kept eating. Finally, after a while of her repeating the words, he realized something was wrong. He stopped eating and angrily left the palace and went to a nearby village to cool down. The queen, still not satisfied with what she had done, sent the secretary again, this time to bring Talia, pretending the king wished to see her as well. Talia left her palace immediately, longing to see her king again. When she arrived, Talia was immediately brought to the queen. Now, Talia knew nothing of the king already having been married, so she was really confused at what was happening. The queen was really angry and full of vengeance towards Talia and the king. Talia tried to explain what had happened, but the queen refused to listen to anything Talia had to say. She ordered her to be burnt at the stake. Realizing there was nothing she could say or do, Talia fell to her knees and begged her for time to remove her gown she was wearing. The queen agreed, not because she felt sorry for Talia, but because she wanted the gown for herself. Talia slowly removed one piece of her clothing at a time, all the while crying and sobbing. With each piece she removed, she would cry louder and louder. The king was returning to his palace at this time and heard all the crying. He quickly rushed inside and found his dear Talia naked before the queen and demanded to know what was happening. The queen was so wrapped up in her vengeance and laughed as she told the king that she had served him his own children for dinner the night before and that Talia will be burnt at the stake. While nobody was paying attention, Talia snuck around behind the queen and shoved her into the fire. The queen screamed in agony and begged for help, but no one dared move to save the queen as she burned. The king was angry about what might have happened had he not returned in time and commanded his secretary and cook be brought to him. He confronted them to get the truth. The secretary told him the same thing the queen did, but the cook remained quiet. So angry at this point, the king ordered the secretary and cook be thrown into the fire and face the same fate that was meant for his beloved Talia. After the secretary and cook's sentence was carried out, Talia, now dressed, turned to the king with a look of pure hatred and demanded to know why he was not honest with her. The king looked at Talia in shock and in fear, for her eyes seemed to be glowing red with her anger. He dropped to his knees in front of his beloved and begged her for forgiveness, but Talia refused to listen. At this point, the entire kingdom had arrived to watch the spectacle unfold, and all were mesmerized with the enchanted beauty who had their king on his knees begging. Not really wanting to hear any more excuses, the king was now sputtering. Talia turned her back to him and raised her hand. At that moment, the unseen hands that had helped Talia and the baby survive lifted the king and tossed him into the fire to meet the same fate as his wife. Nobody watching dared come to the rescue of their king for fear of the same fate. Talia left and returned to her father's kingdom, where she was welcomed with open arms.